So welcome everyone. My name is Conrad Woody. I'm the managing partner of the Washington office at Odgers Berndtson. Odgers is the sixth largest talent advisory and executive search firm in the world, based in London. And we are pleased to welcome you here today for a riveting and in-depth conversation about supporting Black leaders in 2022 and beyond. And I am so pleased to have Sharika Ekbo and John Ferguson with us for this conversation. And the outcomes is to ensure that business leaders, human capital leaders, nonprofits, and executives have tangible ideas, thoughts, and strategies on how to invest in, cultivate, and support their Black workforce here and in the next stage of the pandemic. And so with us today, we are fortunate to have John Ferguson, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for NASCAR. In this role, John will oversee all human resources and provide strategic leadership around talent acquisition, employee engagement, and culture development. For nearly a decade, John was in senior human resources roles at Monumental Sports and Entertainment here in Washington, D.C., most recently serving as the Vice President of People and Culture. While at MSE, he led the HR function for 6 sport teams and properties, including the Washington Wizards, the Washington Capitals, the Washington Mystics, 4 facilities, Capital One Arena, and 2,500 employees. Welcome, John. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Conrad. Looking forward to the engagement and conversation today.
Wonderful. Super glad to have Sharika Ekbo, who brings nearly 20 years of strategic leadership, human capital, talent management, and professional development experience as the Chief Diversity Officer for Anaplan. Over the course of her career, she has worked for JPMorgan Chase, General Electric, and the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Prior to joining Anaplan, Sharika was the Global Inclusion Lead for Research and Artificial Intelligence teams at Google, where she collaborated with senior leadership to implement several diversity, equality, and inclusions campaigns. Among them was an effort to expand targeted outreach to underrepresented communities. Another focused on bringing more women and people of color into the data science space through mentoring and corporate sponsorship programs. Sharika, thank you for joining today, and we look forward to your expertise.
Thank you for having me, Conrad.
Excellent, excellent. So let's just jump in. So John and Sharika, in understanding organizations and corporate leaders' need to keep the pressure on to actively support and cultivate and invest in their Black talent, with the audience, would you mind sharing some initial thought on how you've individually led on the issue over the last 2 years?
I'll start. So look, I can just say I'm excited to be on this call. As I was scrolling the list, I saw a couple of people from my current team, my former team. So just want to say thank you and shout out to you all. But over the past, 10 to 15 years, we continue to read up on diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? And over the past 2 years, I would say, many people have been thinking about what they can do in order to serve as allies or learn more about, some of the social unrest or ways to support, Black leaders, which is what we're talking about today. But in my research, I came across a quote from Bell Hooks. And she says, solidarity is not the same as support. So let me say that again. Solidarity is not the same as support. And that is because support can be occasional, okay? It can be given and as easily withdrawn. Solidarity requires sustained and ongoing commitment. So what I will tell you is that is exactly what I tell my leaders every single day. It is a commitment. This is not just a temporary movement. Right. And one of the things that I see leaders, specifically those who may be less comfortable with talking about how to support Black employees or people of color or historically underrepresented groups, is that they tend to lump DEI all into one word, like it's like laissez-faire, and it's not one word. There are three distinct words, right? Diversity, equity, and inclusion, right? So, but let me break it down just a little bit because I have my own philosophy on how I think about it. Diversity are all the ways that we're different and several intersectional groups in between. But when I talk to my leaders, diversity is about the data. Right? Everyone wants to understand the workforce demographic and the representation of the workforce. And data is critical because it helps us identify and measure gaps that we're seeing, but that's not enough. And I think that is where I get my leaders to think more critically about inclusion and about equity. And equity is simply leveling the playing field. That is what Black leaders need you to do. We need you to level the playing field and ensure that the systems and processes that we have are fair and equitable, right? When I think about inclusion, Conrad, it's really an intentional action. So when I talk to my leaders and I ask them who in your network looks different from you, it's about being intentional about that outreach to those who do not look like you, whether it's race, gender, nationality, sexuality, religion, whatever it may be. But if we're going to dial it back a bit and get down to tangible actions, I would say this. Name the groups and the initiatives that you are actually trying to accomplish. And when I say that is when I talked about lumping DEI together, underrepresented groups are also generally lumped together. Mm-hmm. People don't name, companies and organizations don't name. Here are the initiatives for our Latinx group. Here are the initiatives for our women. Here are the initiatives for our Black plus talent. We all require something different. So the first thing you can do is to name the groups that you are actually trying to target. And then once we go beyond language, we can really start adding metrics to that. The metrics help us pinpoint exactly where the gaps are and what we need to do to shift them.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I really appreciate what you talked about, the difference between support and sustaining. Right?
Yeah.
Those are two totally different things. To show up authentically, you can be supportive, but there's an energy difference about sustaining. And I love how you tied it all the way back to data. And so thank you for that, John. I'm curious on what's on your plate for the last 2 years in this regard.
Yeah, so I think Sharika really hit the nail on the head with her response. The one thing I think that we all can do is collectively just sort of challenge the status quo. I think there's times when we're in meetings and we hear certain things and we have a reaction to it. I think it's time that we start, verbalizing what some of those reactions are. I've been in meetings and just the general language that has been used has been one that I'm like, I'm not sure that's, I don't think that's landing how you intended it to land. So as Black leaders in organizations or as Black people in any organization, we have a right, and you have to understand the appropriateness to that right. But in saying like, hey, even after the meeting, pull somebody to the side, like, hey, you said this, I just want to let you know how that impacted me. Because as the rooms are becoming more and more diverse, the little jocular language that might have been used last year is no longer landing the same and impacting the room the same. So you should be mindful of how your audience is evolving. If we're going to talk about sustaining and making sure that this is here for the long haul, we need to make sure it goes back to the inclusion piece, that we're using appropriate language. Also with that, calling a thing. I love when Sharika was like, this is our Black employee initiative. This is our, Asian employee initiative. We have to start being comfortable with the appropriate labels for things. I think so many times we get into these conversations and we're using very generalized terms, but we have to say that, look, the white men in this room can do X, and that can help X, X, and X. So we need to be able to verbalize and talk to that. And then I think the other thing we have to make sure that we do, because I think when you get to, in leadership roles for organizations, specifically if you are a Black leader, there's sort of two groups that I think you're serving. You're serving your current role and whatever the outcome is needed there, but you are also seen as a gatekeeper for the rest of the Black employees. Like they are looking to you to be the solution to every problem they may have ever encountered. So I think I would say in that, protect your energy in that, because sometimes your role may have nothing to do with with diversity, equity, inclusion. It may be something completely left, but people see you in a role that they aspire to be or a level. So it's inspirational to them because you can't be what you can't see, but you also have to figure out how do you protect just your well-being in that responsibility, because to whom much is given, much is expected. So I say with that, take the opportunity to do that listening tour, but also make sure that you're finding appropriate ways to elevate what you may be receiving, because you may be the only Black executive and maybe they don't have a DEI role. Well, guess what? The burden of tax and being the Black executives that you in so many ways have a dotted line to that DEI space. So I think we have an obligation to then echo out what we are hearing and how employees are experiencing the workforce. So experiencing the workforce can be different for every single person, but we have an obligation to sort of highlight that so that our peers or other higher ups are aware of how people are experiencing it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it can be good or it can be bad. It's just how people are experiencing it. So I think that's really important. And then I think just, leading with truth. And then also nudging your peers and colleagues when they may have that blind spot. I don't really like that word because I think, it isn't blind. There's too much information out here, but I think some people lack awareness of how it may come across. So I say, do our colleagues and our peers justice by pulling them to the side and say, hey, you said this. Let me tell you how it impacted me. And I know there's others in the room, they haven't come to me about it, but if you continue to use that language, it might not be the outcome that we're looking for. So let's wordsmith this. What are you trying to accomplish here? Let's put some different language in the room that motivates everyone to go towards the goal we're working towards. So,
yeah, and I really enjoy the way that you frame that, John, because, number one, as we all know, as the conversation around allyship and advocacy has changed since the last 2 years of the tragic murder of George Floyd, assigning a value to it is okay. You can call it the Black mentorship program. You can call it the Latinx inclusion or South Asian Pacific Islander or LGBTQ employees, because it's important, especially in this environment, to ensure that they are seen. And then moreover, I love what you said about awareness, because really, change happens at the point where the change needs to happen. So being comfortable, being uncomfortable, sharing information with our colleagues about how to make us feel is really important. So I really appreciate how you structured that to give our audience actual tangible things to do to improve the well-being of their Black workforce. Coming back to you, Sharika, now we both know being inclusive is directly tied to corporate and financial commercial success. As we emerge into this next chapter of what life will be post-pandemic, share with our audience some actionable strategies in investing in Black talent that's relevant across all industries and sectors.
Thank you, Conrad. I think that's important. I think the first thing to say is post-pandemic. I mean, who would have thought? I mean, we're not there yet, right? I am hearing that a lot of companies are starting to recall their workforce and asking them to come in or to create some sort of hybrid solution. And that is okay. But I would say there are a couple of things that we need to think about as leaders. There are unique challenges that Black employees face. But one of the analogies that I wanted to use here, or that comes to mind, is, have you heard the saying that when, the majority get a cold, the Black people get the flu? Mm-hmm. Right. I think it really underscores some of the tremendous inequities that we see in healthcare and other industries as well. Right. And so when you design a system or a people process, you need to be intentional about inclusion of and for Black folk, period. Point blank, end of discussion. And so there are a lot of conversations happening right now, even at Anaplan, around the future of work and how we can design our programs to really be intentional about that inclusion. And so one of the things that I would say is, given that culture and family is so important to Black people, right? During the pandemic, we could not go to Big Mama's house, Grandma's house, or something after church to gather the way we would want to. And that's really important for us. then if we're thinking about how to translate that into the workforce, we need to be thinking about how we are intentional about setting up community. And when I say that knowing that many people on this call may have even made a career move or switched employers since 2020. Right? The great resignation is real. And at Anaplan, I've told my team, let's think of it as the great reimagination. So as we reimagine the workforce, as we reimagine how we think about some of these challenges that we're facing as a world, as a community, what do we do? Specifically for Black folks, connect them, please. Please connect them. So let me just say this. I took on this senior role at Anaplan in June of 2021. One of the most important things that I found was in my interview process, Anaplan was intentional about connecting me with leaders who look like me and a community that looks like me to ensure that I knew that there was a place for me. And that to me is one of the most critical elements of my decision-making process. Right. So they were clear that Victor Barnes, right, our SVP of strategic growth and Anaplan and our foundation interviewed me and had real conversation with me, not just, the 3 or 4 interview questions that they had, but really about his experience, his lived experiences. And the same was true about our Black employees of African descent. Our co-leads met with me, not only to understand who I am, but also to share with me what they were doing so that they would understand if there was a collective opportunity here for us to further engagement at Anaplan. And so when I think about that connection and community, that's really important. The other thing I can say about preparing Black leaders specifically, give them their flowers now. Do not make them wait. Okay, like this is what I mean. So sometimes I find that there are executives that come into a role or people of color into a senior leadership role, and they have to wait to get the budget. They don't get it on day one. They have to wait to get the staff. The head count isn't allocated. Like, no, that's not a thing. Right? So in addition to community, they actually need the human and financial resources to get the job done. Because it's long known that Black women come in and save the day, but we also need to make sure that they are prepared with the resources to be successful. Because you can't ask them to take over this failing P&L or this failing organization without giving them the support that they need. So those are just, a couple of things that I think we can do to make sure that we are preparing and supporting and standing in solidarity with our Black leaders.
Yeah, and I really enjoy that, Sharika, because the way that we advise clients in the talent spectrum today is you have to make people feel. And essentially a little bit about what you said about your company helping you build community, my sense is a positive byproduct of that is they made you feel, which potentially may have gone into your decision-making process to bring your time, talents, and gifts as a Black executive into this organization. So I love what you advised our audience is that it is very possible for you to be thoughtful in recruiting, retaining, and cultivating talent to actively and intentionally building community. So that's something that someone can do today. And furthermore, systemic change happens in the spin. And so, making sure that when folks, our Black folks are moved into roles of leadership,
yes,
have the appropriate budgetary support and they have advocacy and sponsorship to ensure they have the resources to be successful. Because the reality is we can do a lot with a little, but we shouldn't have to.
That's
correct.
We
shouldn't have to, because that's when the equity conversation happens. And even though we're able to overperform with a little, the things that these folks in the audience can do is say, well, why does she have to perform a lot with a little? How can I use my voice to be able to help advance equity as it relates to resources and budgetary support to fulfill those outcomes that the company wants? So I think that's really great advice to share about community and giving us our flowers now, because that's how you make people feel. So I love that. So coming back to you, John, I'm super curious, and for the folks in the audience, I'm sure many of us have seen this report from the Harvard Business Review that shared that 20% of white employees have executive sponsors, but only 5% of Black employees do. So I'm curious, from your perspective, John, can you share some insight with our audience how CEOs and HR leaders can support the sponsorship and executive visibility amongst their Black employees? But on balance, I want you to also talk about how Black employees and leaders can play an active part in extending their own leadership and career journey.
Yes, great question, and sort of lots of opportunity to respond here. So when I think about sponsorship, I think we have to make sure everybody understands what that is and what that looks like. So I think you can have a coach, you can have a sponsor, you can have a mentor. I like to say your coach is sort of exactly what you say it is. As a coach, they're giving you guidance, they're helping you out. A mentor is, I think, the person that you're going to tell the good, the bad, and the ugly to. But your sponsor is the person who you may or may not know is your sponsor, because they technically only see your highlight reel. They only see your Instagram, your TikTok, where you've had time to curate it and it looks perfect. But those are the people that are speaking your names in rooms that you are not in. The key to establishing that type of relationship, I think, is intentionality on both parts, but also not being afraid to step out of your comfort zone. So from a company perspective, you need to be intentional. If we say we're committed to seeing increased diversity above X level in our organization, we need to stick to that. So every time we're talking about this, what is our data trending and what is it telling us at this meeting? When you look around a meeting space, if everybody in that room looks the same, the meeting should be canceled. It's just simple as that. The meeting should be canceled because we didn't bring someone else with us or invite someone else with us to help us challenge the status quo or to help us innovate and reimagine, to use Sharika's word, reimagine what these outcomes could be. And there's another concept that I heard of, and I think it's really good. You know, a lot of times you get access as a leader to go to XYZ event or this or that, and you may think, oh, I want to bring my spouse or I'm going to bring a peer. I always take those opportunities to bring someone who has never had the opportunity to experience that. Can I bring you to this corporate dinner with me? Can I bring you to this corporate gala with me so that you can see and be inspired by what's in front of you? I'll share a quick story about the first time I saw that in the corporate setting, the Executive Leadership Gala. I got invited the day of. It was in DC. They had a seat open. And I remember I called my wife and I was like, as I had a flight to catch. And she was like, I think it's one of those times when you cancel that flight and you go to this gala. I went to the gala. And the motivation that I got out of that room, it goes back to what I said earlier. You can't be what you cannot see. So going into that room, in that space, and seeing Black leaders walk in their truth, be authentic, have a good time, but willing to talk to little old me who just got invited 4 hours before this event started, and me just see a reflection of myself and in positions of power and scope and influence is the first thing. So I think it's really big on making sure that the companies are intentional, but you as the Black employee trying to rise up through the ranks, you also need to be intentional. You also need to be intentional, So bring someone with you. Then I want to remind everyone, as you're working up through the ranks, understand there's a game to all of this. There's a game, so sit back. My mom always told me, if you don't understand the rules or you don't know what's going on, sit back and observe. Sit back and observe. That's the greatest tool that you can have in your toolbox. Observe, ask appropriate questions, and then come into the fold or introduce yourself into the conversation, figure out how you can bring value to that engagement. Then you also have to think about this. We have our jobs and they give us a list of have tos. That's what you have to do. And there's the don't have to. Do you know where success lies? Success lies in the people who do the don't have to steps. That is success. That is how you beat out your competition around you. So if you're doing your have tos, you did your job. Thank you. We gave you a paycheck. But the don't have tos are what set you apart. So always remember that, even when your days are tired and your long, days are long and you're tired, you're exhausted, figure out, how do I set myself apart? Another secret I'll tell you, have a friend in HR. Always have a friend in HR. They're going to be able to give you insight, just, hey, this is coming up, or hey, you're having visibility with them. Because there's been so many times I've been in rooms, I'm like, you know what? Sharika told me she was interested in this, and she explained that project that she worked on. You know what? Here's a colleague of ours that I don't think is on our radar, but Sharika is actually really good at X, Y, and Z. I think we should, at least have a conversation with her to get her feedback and see if she'd be interested in this. So, and then when those moments happen, let's not shortchange ourselves, because so many times we can say, well, I don't know if I want to do that. I'm not sure if that's the right opportunity for me. No. When the door is open, let's walk into it. You can always backtrack, but when it's open, let's walk in. From a company standpoint, connect with your employee resource groups. Those are going to be your hotbeds of understanding where the talent is, what the interests are, where the culture within your organization is really residing. Take those people out and do one-to-ones if you're a CEO, if you're an HR leader, because that's where you're going to get much more dynamic feedback and engagement. And then you can figure out how your organization is showing up to those people. So be intentional, connect with your ERGs. Always make sure that there's diversity in every room, every decision, every equation that we're doing. And then if you are the employee, learn to play the game. This is a game of managing up. And then also the have to and the don't have to. And then finally, I'll close with this. There's a notion that as Black people, we have to always work twice as hard. I want us to kind of turn that upside down, because sometimes we run ourselves ragged trying to beat a game that wasn't designed for us to win. So I want you to remember that when you have maximized all you can get out of a certain space and time, I want you to move on. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. So the great resignation, the great reimagination, that was all people saying, you know what? I got still, I got quiet. I was grieving life as I once knew it, or grieving that I wasn't comfortable here anymore. And so guess what? We got so uncomfortable that we sparked something in ourselves to go get what we wanted out of another situation. So let's not sit down and be long suffering. Let's remember that we are in control of our professional destiny. There's not going to be someone that says, hey, here's your next opportunity at return. Sometimes you're going to have to take life by its horn and say, I'm going to go get this opportunity. A prime example of that is all the success we see of people on social media. They got onto a free platform and now they have 7 million viewers. A free platform, 7 million views. I'm sure at some point they were doing some 9-to-5 job and they decided that that was no longer what they wanted for themselves. So let's not give too many external people the authority over what we want to achieve and accomplish in our life. So that is how I would say that. So it's intentionality on both sides, from the company and down to the employee.
I love that, especially just the sequence of things. We talked about sponsorship and, who is not at the table. So if you think about the people in this audience, John is saying, if there's someone from not a diverse identity at the table, it probably is not the right meeting. So that's something that you can do today. And one thing I really loved is, John, you and I both have been to the Executive Leadership Council Gala. It's absolutely inspiring. And so for those that are in the audience that can take someone to something like that, yes, or an event in your city or town that would provide executive visibility, these are things that you can do today to help support and cultivate your Black talent. But at the same time, what I appreciate what you said, John, is we have to take accountability as Black employees to shepherd our own careers by doing what I like to call is doing the things, right? Yes, you show up to work and you perform, but what are the other things that you did to control your narrative? And lastly, what I don't think gets talked enough, and then I'll move over to Sharika, is it's okay that if your tour of duty has ended at a place, if you are no longer, on your learning journey and no longer having additional responsibility, it is totally fine, because especially what the pandemic has done is created an opportunity for people to go to workplaces of meaning and purpose. And if you're not finding that, it is okay to take your power back and go find a place that is. So John, your comments were very conclusive about not only how leaders can support sponsorship and executive visibility, but also what we can do to make sure we're managing our careers effectively. I'm really curious to go back to Sharika. It's like, now we know Black talent is inclusive of ethnicity, but it's also gender and sexual orientation as well. Talk to us in the audience a little bit about strategies to invest in the career and learning journeys of Black women in the workplace and actively create safety and advocacy for our Black LGBTQA employees as well.
Wow, that's a mouthful. I think there are a couple of things. One, John touched on a couple of things that I wanted to make sure I came back to, and that was around employee resource groups, right? He encouraged us to connect with them. Conrad, when you talk about intersectionality, I feel like our ERGs are where we find a lot of community building and support. And one thing I can say is I'm so humbled to be in the role of the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer, whatever the title is, right? But I always remind people that doesn't mean that I know everything. I don't know. This work continues to evolve, and each day I'm learning something else. This morning we had a call with a vendor who's doing some work for us around disabilities, and some of the language that was used in a training last week is no longer accepted. And we had to right that wrong, right? And so as we start talking about certain neurodivergent disorders, we have to stay relevant and on top of those changing barriers and the changing demographics and language. And so I say all that to say, when you don't know as leaders, number one, it's okay to say you don't know. Just be vulnerable and say you don't know. It's okay. The second thing is partner with those who do. So a part of my inclusion, equity, and belonging strategy. So back to you, Annalisa, I didn't forget you. Earlier, as I was describing diversity, equity, and inclusion, I didn't say anything about belonging, but let me be clear. Belonging is the end goal. Belonging is about connection. And what I have found is that belonging is one of those concepts that transcends race, gender, religion, and everything else, okay? And so when we foster and set our sights on belonging and connection, which is predicated on respect and justice, then we generally have this greater inclusion and a greater community within the workplace or organization. But I say all that to say, a part of the strategy that I have at Anaplan is to bring in and build strategic partnerships. And one of those partnerships is with an organization called Stonewall, right, out of the UK. Anaplan is a global company. And so one of the challenges that we have is developing a global strategy that we then implement locally. Because inclusion, equity, and belonging look different in Israel than it does in Minneapolis, in New York than it does in Australia. And so as I'm trying to serve all of my employees, my partners, and my customers, I have to be inclusive of that. And so certain strategic partnerships really do help us understand communities better than we could ever understand them ourselves. And so Stonewall is just one example that we've worked with, an organization that we worked with from a Pride ERG perspective, primarily because over the past, I would want to say, there's been a shift and a focus on certain groups, right? We've had social unrest in the US. We have had an awakening, right? Because Black people are, I was gonna say were tired. No, are tired, right? And so there have been a ton of resources. There's been a lot of lip service. There's been a lot of, media coverage on the Black experience or the Black community, right? And I don't want to say but, and as a result, other organizations or other intersectional groups may have felt left out. And so what has happened is, what I tell people to do is, number one, you partner with other groups. So your ERG should partner together so that there is additional support in the time of need, right? When we had our campaigns for Stop Asian Hate, it didn't mean that we stopped focusing on what was happening to the Black community. No, it meant that we band together to ensure that we provided support for both groups simultaneously because they were both in need. So when I think about it, I think about those strategic partnerships that we need to employ and invest in to ensure that we are providing the support when needed. And I know we have a lot of senior leaders on the call, and I know we have a lot of practitioners on the call. What I will tell you is lip service. The days of lip service are over. So we need you to put your money where your mouth is. And I need you to roll. I said this the other day. I said, I'm going to roll up my sleeves. And someone said, no, Sharika, you keep your sleeves down. Other people need to roll their sleeves up. Okay. Because this is the time for allyship. This is the time for us to really step in and offer that sponsorship that John spoke about, right? Listen, you don't have to identify with your employee in order to be their sponsor. In fact, my greatest sponsors have actually been white men, right, wrong, or indifferent, in the professional space. In my personal space and in the community, they have been Black women, right? But in the professional space, I have had very strong white men continue to advocate for me in a way that has placed me on boards, in a way that has challenged my thinking, in a way that has asked me to consider other candidates that I wouldn't have necessarily considered, but it is a reciprocal relationship. I do the same for them. I challenge them daily to think differently. I challenge them daily to tell me that they can't find good Black talent. I'm sick of that narrative. That don't make any sense. Because if Beyonce can find 24 Black trombone players to play in her music video, then that means that y'all can find 10 data scientists that look like me. So yeah, I'm gonna get off my soapbox, but I will tell you, there is a lot of support and advocacy and sponsorship. And I just want to make sure that everyone listening, because I know I have a diverse audience here, that everyone listening understands that you too have a role to play. Everybody has a role to play, whether that's the protege, whether that's the mentor, as John said, whether that's the sponsor, or whether that's the leader. If you are in a position of power and influence where you can change and shape hiring decisions, bet on Black talent. Because what I'm telling you is when you change that leadership team, back to what John said, you can't be what you can't see. So the reason why you may have more Black and brown people joining your organization is likely because they see the vision, but they can also see themselves.
I got to echo something that Sharika said. I've seen a lot of times where I have Black, leaders in organization in positions to hire, and they get themselves in this mind fog of, well, all the candidates, I want to hire a Black. Okay. Are they the best candidates? Like, why are you short guessing yourself? How many times have we come in and seen a slate that all look the same? Now, I want us all to bring in a diverse slate, but I want people to let go of that mental pool of the status quo. That is the system working. If you're questioning your ability to hire the best candidate just because they happen to look like you.
And can we say diversity is not less than? I had to tell people I was good at math when I was in college. Diversity in no way, shape, or form equals less than at all. So we have to shift the mindset. And while we at it, let's talk about this. There's no such thing as a diverse hire. Please stop with it. I can't take it. There's no such word. And Conrad is looking at me like, okay, no, honestly, like while we're here, let's just do a little education. You cannot be a diverse hire. You can have a diverse group. You can have a diverse interview slate. You can have a diverse hiring panel. Let's name what it is that we're looking for. And I think Monique said it in the comments, right? Like people are looking for Black scientists and then they want them to have purple stripes and then orange spots as well. Like everybody wants this unicorn. Stop with the shenanigans. Let's get down to the minimum viable product, right? In this case, look at that job description and take out all the hurdles and barriers that will prohibit people from even applying. You want more women to apply? Use different language. You want more people of color? Add more people to your website. I mean, this is not rocket science, right? But make sure that they can see themselves.
And I also say that even if you can't see yourself, I want you to apply. I meet a lot of young middle career talent, and they're like, well, I was trying to do all this research on the company. A month later, they still hadn't applied. Now the job is gone. The first thing I want you to do is apply. We can have all these conversations later. Of course, I had plenty of conversations before I joined NASCAR. But when it was time to say that's something I'm interested in, you got to be ready to go. Hey, that's something I'm interested in. You have plenty of time to have these conversations. One thing we talked about earlier that I didn't circle back to is, how can we as Black leaders invest in like the talent that we see and that, I think that's around us and help develop them. I believe in giving away all of my resource, all of my power. If I can give you all of if I can prevent you from falling on your knees because I can just take that hit for you, I want to give that away and I want you to learn from it. But I want to tell everyone, if you're on the other end of receiving that advice, be open to it, because in today's landscape, it can be tricky, because sometimes you want to provide someone like, hey, I noticed how you handled this in the meeting, and they may take it defensively. I want everyone to realize that feedback is a gift. And there are oftentimes so many people will not provide it to you. They'll just keep watching you fail. So when somebody offers you the opportunity to give you valuable, constructive feedback or a nudge in the right direction, take it, absorb it, come back to them, have a follow-up conversation with it so that you can learn how you can set yourself apart. The third thing in the workplace I want to tell everybody to think about is asking for feedback. Here's 3 simple questions, because a lot of times your leaders are too skittish to really give you the valuable feedback that you're looking for because they don't want to hurt your feelings or whatever they think it may be. You can ask someone, what should I start doing? What should I stop doing? And what should I continue doing? Those are 3 practical steps. Stop doing is something you should stop. Start doing is something you should start. And what you should continue is what you're pretty good at. So keep that 3-prong approach. And you can ask a lot of people in your ecosystem, what should I stop, start, continue? That helps you get feedback so you can continue to refine and sharpen your tools.
Well, listen, the comments are on fire. You guys are bringing so many ideas and strategies that people can actually use, right? Which was the outcome of this conversation. While we're queuing up the Q&A, so folks that have questions for Sharika and John, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. For the 2 of you, just really quickly, so we can leave about 10 minutes for questions, share with the audience, in your view, what is the most important piece of advice on how to create change that we want to see for Black leaders in 2022 and beyond?
I think understand it's a long game. Be patient with yourself and give yourself grace in that, but always continue to hold your head high and take 1 step forward. Every time you get the opportunity to speak truth to power, don't take it lightly, accept the responsibility. But I think just realizing that it's a long game. So many times, me being at NASCAR, which has can get a lot of different reactions from people. And so, oftentimes I say, well, NASCAR in many ways is a different sport than what I was working in. But is the system that different? No, just because this is still the United States. The system is working as it should. I just went from one region where I may not have been able to clearly possibly see the system to a region where I may be able to see it a little bit differently. So I say all that to say, speak the truth to the power in a way that makes us all collectively move forward. And understand that we are all operating under a larger system. You may think that your workplace is the best or the worst, but they're all very much similar. So figure out what parts of that workplace can you control. And don't forget, it's a long game.
I love that. Here we go. What are your thoughts? Your piece of advice for this wonderful audience today?
Ooh. Man, there's so many different things. One piece of advice. Know your value. Know your value. I think for so long, I think that we are questioned given the way that we show up in a workplace or how we identify, or what school we went to, or whatever it is. Know your value. And I think when you know your value, then you can make the decisions around whether or not you invest. That's my word for 2022, whether you invest in your company by staying and by learning and growing and moving laterally and vertically, or whether you decide to go and you listen to some of the advice that John gave earlier, which is just knowing when to leave. But when you know your value, I think that you can make the right decisions for you and the company. And I think a part of knowing your value is doing some self-reflection and a self-assessment, right? To understand what you're good at, to understand where you are right now and what your goals are in the short and long term. So a lot of times I think a part of the great reimagination is that people had to ask themselves if they were happy with what they were doing, if they were happy with the employer they were working at or the mission that they were given. And the answer to that was no. And that's why you've seen a lot of people shift. So just know your value. And at the end of the day, know that you have the power to make all the changes in order to be successful.
No, I love that. I mean, the value conversation is something that's not discussed enough within our conversation. And you're right, the first step of it is self-reflection. But at the same time, excellence is the floor.
Yes, it is.
Right? You don't get a pat on the back for doing your job, right? And so understanding that excellence is the floor, and figuring out ways to continue your learning journey so you can go up market and ask those questions, making sure that you are putting yourself in the swim lane to get quality information that is additive to your learning and career journey. So you're completely right. I love the theme of this topic. So with that being said, if anyone in the audience has questions for our two esteemed panelists, please drop it in the Q&A button down below, and then I'll read them off. And don't be afraid. Like I said, this is a very authentic conversation, and we want folks to walk away with things they can actionably do when leaving this conversation. So we have one question, and I'll address it to both of you all. How does a healthcare foundation get a corporation with a mostly white C-suite to sign their pledge of dismantling systemic barriers for Black women to access healthcare and resources related to their health? So Black women and health is a major issue. So this person wants to know how he or she or they can encourage their leadership to support Black women in health equity.
Ooh, yeah, that was deep.
We're getting out of it. We're getting out of it.
So look, I think a part of it is you have to meet the organization where they are. So what I almost heard that wasn't mentioned in the question is the organization may not be ready for that endorsement right now. So then I say, let's create a path. Where are they today? And what is the ultimate goal that we want? We want their endorsement. We want their support. We want their acknowledgement of Black women, Black people in the healthcare space, and to acknowledge the disparities that lie within that industry. Here's what I will say. I mean, I've been to business school a couple times, right? Data is my thing. I would actually ask them to ensure that their representation of leadership and employees mirror that of which they see in the healthcare industry. And I say that because I know in certain occupations within the healthcare industry, it's a lot of women. It's actually a lot of people of color too. Right? So yes, as you ascend certain ranks within healthcare, right? Physicians, nurses, so on and so forth, the demographics shift. But my point is, a lot of times organizations have to start with having their workforce mirror the available talent and the area in which you serve. So if this is a US company, let's start with that. If we can get them to acknowledge that there's a gap between where we are and where we want to be, that's the first step. I think the second step is really just creating actionable baby steps to move these things along. Sis, I'm sorry, I assumed it came from a woman. Listen, to whoever asked that question, this problem did not happen overnight, and the answer to repair it is not going to happen overnight either. So the best thing that you can do is set your end goal, understand where you are, and find some key influencers in between that can help you move from point A to B until you get to Z, and understand that you can't give up when you meet a barrier. You have to have influencers, capacity, blood, sweat, and tears in between to help you along that journey, because it's going to be a long game. But I think that you have to have a plan in order to get to where you want to go.
That's a great question. Great question. All right, we have our next question up, and we're just getting right into it because that's what we do. The question is, how are you responding to the conversation about reverse discrimination? I'm seeing it come up a lot lately. John, do you want to start that one?
I don't think they're coming to me. They're not saying it to me. I have not seen that professionally. I might have heard some echoes of it, but no one has come to me to say that. So, Sharika?
I think this foolishness. I'm like, what are y'all talking about? How you gonna be discriminated against when you've been the majority for so long? I mean, I had this exact, it cannot exist. Thank you, Rashawn. And I don't understand it. But what I will say is, it goes back to creating this sense of belonging, because what they're essentially saying is, I felt left out.
Yes.
And while the petty side of Sharika wants to say, now how I feel, the professional side of Sharika has to say, I hear you. And the same way that you would like to feel valued and heard and understood and seen is what we have to do for everyone. So you know what? Those historically underprivileged, underserved, marginalized, whatever word you want to use, those groups deserve the spotlight and the attention, and they deserve the equity setting of our processes and our policies. So here's the other thing I need to say. A lot of times we talk about process, but process without policy does not give you sustainability, okay? Because if I tell you I'm gonna do this today, I can do it today, but it's only going to impact today and maybe tomorrow. The only way that we are going to have sustainable change is if we shift the policies and then add some accountability to it. So listen, I don't understand the reverse discrimination claim or argument, but what I will tell you is it is a cry for belonging. And as an organization, and as organizations, we have to work on creating and establishing that point of connection for all of our employees. And generally that's, your mission, your vision, your values. It's those types of things that we need to anchor on in order to get past that.
Yeah.
The key to a lot of this work is vulnerability. So for someone to come to a leader and say, I feel like it's reverse discrimination, that takes probably, I would imagine, a little bit of courage, because you're saying, I feel left out, or this wasn't, I'm banging on the table. So like you say, Sharika, take the opportunity. Let's talk through that. And I think you nailed it, that they don't feel a sense of belonging. They feel other. And throughout all of this work, we want to reduce outsiderness and create insiderness, but also create empathy and a line of sight to other people's experiences that is just not like yours. And so there's this transparency, there's this education piece, and then there's reality. So we have to figure out, how do we morph all of that into something that I like to call lowering the waterline to build connective tissues? Because the more we can build these connective tissues, the more the three of us on this call will realize how we're so different, but then how we are so much alike. And I think if we get to that place of extending grace to each other, we can collectively move forward and accomplish way more.
I love that. And if you think about the core of what John and Sharika said, it's leading with empathy, understanding, and vulnerability, right? And that is something all of you leaders on this call can do. That is an actionable step to improving the well-being and welfare of not just your Black workforce, but your entire workforce. So we have time for about one more question. If anyone wants to put a question in the Q&A button, it's right at the bottom of your screen to the right. But I would highly encourage you take the opportunity to ask a question of these two fantastic panelists. We've learned so much from John and Sharika today that can help you amplify and improve the well-being of your workforce. So any other questions that folks want to share? Okay, so starting with John and then ending with Sharika, any other thoughts in closing as a call to action to support Black leaders now in 2022 and beyond?
Black leaders, make sure you are intentional with your self-care. Secure your face mask first. You can't be a resource or guidance to anyone else unless you are in the right state of mind to do that. And then I would say, finally, bring someone with you and challenge your peers to bring someone with them. And if they don't know who to bring, find somebody for them to bring.
And woo, that is a word. Bring somebody along. I love that. And then just be yourself. Don't be afraid to be yourself. I can honestly admit that I was afraid to be my full authentic self for a while. And I might be speaking from a point of privilege now because I've ascended to the executive ranks and all this other thing that I feel like people will listen to me now. But if I could tell my younger self something, or if I could tell my daughter what to do, right? Just be yourself, and people want to hear your point of view. Just know that there is a way to do it. And I think oftentimes a part of getting to know the game that John spoke about earlier is really understanding your company culture and understanding how to align with it. And guess what? If it doesn't align with you, then that's not the company for you. So I will tell you, align any DEI, people-related talent acquisition initiatives with your overall company's business. Make sure that those things align. When they align, it is easier to have the conversation. Then find an influencer to help you and ride the train. I mean, really, that's what it is.
I love this. This has been a powerful, substantive hour and an excellent way to end Black History Month. So John, Sharika, on behalf of Rogers Benson and our firm around the world and the audience, we thank you. We thank you for your ideas. We thank you for your passion, and we thank you for your advocacy to create change in the world that we want to see. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. The folks that are registered will get a copy of this recording, and we hope that this is helpful information to ensure that you show up for your Black workforce, not just in February, but in the future. So thank you all. Everyone have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Conrad. Thank you.
Conrad. Bye-bye.